Good afternoon and welcome to the NRSS monthly webinar. My name is Christy. We're going to wait just a few minutes for some other people to join us, but in the meantime, it would be cool if you could just take a second to fill out this quick poll, and we'll just wait for some more people. So maybe like 103, 104 is when we'll get going. Okay, well, hopefully you guys have all taken a quick second to get your vote in on the poll that's open. We're going to go ahead and get started here, I think. So let's see, we'll close the poll. Okay, great. So got the results up there. All right, thank you everyone for participating in that. Now we're going to get going here. Okay, and I'm back. Thank you for bearing with us while we figure out how to get the poll closed. But again, my name is Christy, and Christy Burnett. I work in the Office of Education and Outreach in sunny and beautiful Fort Collins, Colorado. And thanks again for joining us. Each month we have this monthly webinar to share a little bit about what we're doing, what's happening in the field, of science and natural resources and how you can get involved. So if you'd like to learn a bit more about the webinar series, you can visit our Google site, and that's at go.nps.gov/NRSS-monthly, and we'll get that in the chat box for you so that you can access that easily. And then, so after that, sorry, I'm a little distracted by the poll here. And I hope that you do go ahead and bookmark that website so you can get it for future reference. And that's where we keep recordings of all of our previous webinars, and you can see what's coming up next. So next month, David Trevino will be presenting, and that'll be on December 13th. And he's going to be talking about 2018, the Year of the Bird, which is actually a joint effort of National Geographic, the National Audubon Society, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and BirdLife International. And so the Year of the Bird will celebrate the wonder of our feathered friends. So we do hope you come to that webinar and see how the National Park Service is going to join in those efforts. And you'll get an invitation to that later this week or early next week. So again, let's just give me just one more quick minute to get the presentation going, and then we'll get going here. Okay, so today we have Brent Lignell, and since we're kind of stuck on this one slide, I'm going to go ahead and change it over to him so he can get us going. So are you ready there, Brent? Are you ready, Brent?
Okay, can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah.
Okay.
So Brent is a planner in our Natural Sounds and Night Skies division, and he is here today to talk about a new software that really helps planners model air tour noise and map sound levels much easier and faster than before. So take it away, Brent.
All right, thanks, Christy. All right, well, thanks everyone for joining us today. So in today's talk, I'm going to introduce this tool that, as Christy mentioned, we're using in our overflights program to help inform the management of commercial air tours. This tool isn't necessarily new, but it has undergone some recent upgrades that we're pretty excited about, and which are really improving the usability and flexibility for the user. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so before I jump into the tool, though, I want to give you a little context about why this tool has been so helpful. I'll start with some background on the extent of air tours over NPS units and talk a little bit about our legislative authority for managing them, and then I'll get into the tool and go through a demonstration. So first, about our legislative authority. In 2000, Congress passed the National Parks Air Tour Management Act, recognizing that air tour noise could impair visitors' experiences and park resources. The Act requires the management of commercial air tours for each unit of the park system or abutting tribal land where operations occur or are proposed. It applies to within half a mile of a park boundary, meaning extending a half mile outside of a park boundary, and for any tours that take place at or below 5,000 feet above ground level. It was amended in 2012 to require operators to submit reports of air tour activity. So until 2012, when the amendments kicked in, we didn't have a good idea on the extent of air tours. But beginning in 2013, operators have been required to submit quarterly reports to the Federal Aviation Administration and the National Park Service. So each quarter, we now receive about 40 to 50 reports from the operators. And these reports provide information on each air tour, including the date, time, aircraft make and model, and route for each individual air tour. So this map is showing you the 48 parks where air tours took place in 2016. There's actually almost 80. There's 79 parks where one or more operators have authority to fly, but operators don't always fly at parks where they are authorized to conduct tours. And just a note about Grand Canyon, that's the green circle you can see in the slide. They're actually not covered by the National Parks Air Tour Management Act. It's actually covered by other legislation that preceded NPATMA, but there is a reporting requirement there as well, so we do know about the activity at Grand Canyon. So as this map indicates, air tours are an issue throughout the system, and the noise can have a big impact on park resources and visitor experience. And so with this data from air tour reporting, we can now better characterize that noise and begin to explore air tour management options. So here's a closer look at some of the air tour data for the busiest 9 parks. And what this chart is showing you for these 9 parks are the tours for 2013 through 2016, as well as IOA. And IOA stands for Interim Operating Authority for each park. The IOA is an annual cap that operators are allowed to fly as authorized by the Federal Aviation Administration. Each operator has their own unique IOA for a park, and what's shown on this chart is a collective IOA for all operators in total at a park. So if you look at Hawaii Volcanoes, for example, the second park in, you can see that operators can fly a collective total of over 25,000 tours per year, but they've been flying roughly around 15,000 each year. So with this data now, the reporting data as well as the IOA, we can begin to build scenarios or model scenarios that represent both current conditions as well as sort of what if scenarios based on the IOA. And for lots more information on air tours, including the history, the legislation, current management efforts, I invite you to visit our new story map. It's been created by Adam Biko, another overflights planner in our group and social scientist. And before we jump into the tool, Christy, I think we have our second poll for the audience. Okay, so I'm not seeing the results, but I am kind of seeing it in this little audience view that I have, but it looks like, correct me if I'm wrong, Christy, but over half have commercial air tours. So if I'm reading that correctly.
That is correct.
Which is great.
Yep.
All right, good deal. So we do have representation from those 48 parks or so where air tours are occurring. And I'm going to talk more broadly to, to those parks as well as parks that aren't experiencing air tours, because the concepts behind this tool and model could actually apply to any number of acoustic analyses. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to go on to a little bit about the model now. The Aviation Noise Analysis and Mapping Tool, which is what we're calling it for the moment. That may evolve. So at the very basic level, this tool is a library. It's a library of noise contours and metric results for single air tour operations. And these single air tour operations were generated from an FAA noise model. In this case, the Aviation Environment Design Tool, or AEDT model. And once the results of the AEDT noise impacts are populated in this library, in the Aviation Noise Mapping Tool, we can now build many new scenarios of interest from this library of operations. And the key here is that we can rapidly generate maps and tables of noise exposure and soundscape conditions in a park. The modeling in AEDT takes a long time and is expensive, but once we get those results, we can really mix and match and analyze many new scenarios in a matter of minutes. So with this new tool, we can now compare different air tour routes, different aircraft, different altitudes, even the number of flights. So here's another illustration of what I mean. If you look at the top, it starts with an operation. In this case, we define an operation as a single aircraft modeled over a single route at a given speed, altitude, and over a certain terrain, and through certain ambient acoustic conditions. So that operation is modeled in the FAA noise model, shown here in the gray boxes, and that generates noise results accounting for the complexities of terrain, the speed and power of the aircraft, the physics of noise propagation, etc. And these results are represented in this illustration by those colored blocks. And so this operation is done for each operation of interest. And there could be many operations. They could reflect what air tour operators are currently doing. If you think back to that map of 2013 through 2016 data, maybe we derive something to represent current operations. What they might do under some kind of air tour agreement, which might include different aircraft or different routes, or possibly that IOA scenario where we say, what if they flew their maximum allotment? What would that look like? And this process of generating these results for many operations over park areas, like I said, can take weeks, even months, and cost on the order of tens of thousands of dollars. But then when we populate each operation into the mapping tool, this becomes that library where you can then create multiple other scenarios, which are represented at the bottom with the different combinations of the blocks. So while it may have taken months to generate that initial library, once you have those results, you can really generate scenario results in a matter of seconds or minutes. So here's another example of that concept. This shows a fictional helicopter over Mount Rainier, and the route is that kind of spaghetti line segment. Those green dots are locations of interest that would be identified by the park to represent maybe campgrounds or trailheads. And this is one operation now. This is a blue helicopter coming in from the west, circles Mount Rainier, and exits the park. So that operation would be modeled in the FAA noise model, AEDT, and generate its own noise contour. So that's one building block. So then we might run another operation, obtaining a different noise contour. In this operation, a red helicopter flies the same route, but it may be a noisier model or have other flight characteristics that increase noise. And that'll generate its own unique footprint, which is a second building block. And finally, we have a third model, a fixed wing who flies in from the east. And from that, we can generate a third noise contour and a third building block. So now we have generated 3 building blocks and populated the mapping tool. And from these 3 unique operations, we can start to generate any number of scenarios. For example, we could start running scenarios that might look like this, possibly this, maybe this, or just that. So these examples could represent an average day, a busy day, or the theoretical max allotments, or possibly some new scenario that might align with some conditions of a proposed air tour agreement. I do want to note, though, that we are still limited by the library of operations. We can't just draw on a new route, get results. Instead, we'd have to go, if there was something drastically different, we'd have to go back to the more complex aviation noise model and derive a new building block. But the idea is to build in enough flexibility early on to accommodate most of these scenarios that could be of interest. But occasionally, we do have to go back and do more of that modeling. So before we do get into that tool, Christy, it's time for our third poll.
All right, Brent, there it is. Hopefully everyone can just take a quick second and answer that poll for us. Okay, then Brent, you want to just talk about the results for a minute when it's over? All right, can you see that, Brent? We had most of the people answered. So it looks like the biggest concern is aircraft noise at 57%. So it looks like they came to the right webinar, huh?
All right, well, that's good. Good audience. And just to note, though, too, the reason I was interested in this one is because, there's really no reason we couldn't insert other noise layers into this model, too. As long as we have the data through some other modeling effort, you could apply this concept to other noise sources. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But aircraft are certainly a primary concern in many parks, and that was really the catalyst for this office going back years ago. So now I'm going to jump out of my PowerPoint and go to the actual model and start through the demonstration. So when you open this tool, you'll see a drop-down menu. And this represents each study that's currently available in this tool. So right now you can see there's 10 studies, and this is based on parks for which some level of air tour planning has previously taken place. Most of these parks have either started down the path of an air tour management plan or an agreement. In this case, we're going to use Mount Rainier for our example. My one disclaimer is that while there are still a few operators at Mount Rainier with some IOA or authority to conduct tours, there actually haven't been any tours reported there since reporting started in 2013. It just makes it for a nice demonstration of this tool since it's a square park and only a couple of routes. But just know that it doesn't reflect actual conditions. So if we select Mount Rainier, the program is automatically going to load a base map and bring up the park. You can see the park defined by the black and white dashed line, and then you'll see a gray line, which is the National Parks Air Tour Management Act boundary. So that's that half-mile buffer I talked about earlier. Any tours that occur within that gray boundary and at or below 5,000 feet AGL above ground level, that's where NEPATMA applies. The green dots, again, are these locations of interest, and these would be identified by the park for some resource management perspective, like I said, a campground or trailhead or viewpoint. You can click on the dots for a little more information. And so in this study, we have 2 routes, and you can see in a minute that there's actually 20 operations in our library due to multiple types of aircraft modeled at multiple altitudes. So if I go over here and click on the Mount Rainier dropdown, reconfigure my window a little bit. So now you can see this library of those 20 operations. These are those colored building blocks I was representing earlier. There's an east entry route, and on that there's 5 aircraft modeled, each at 9,500 feet above mean sea level, or at mean sea level, and another at 11,000 feet MSL. There's a west entry route with the same 5 aircraft modeled at 2 altitudes, 9,000 feet and 9,500 feet. And so this is the foundation from which any scenario would be built. This is that library. So now we want to create some scenarios. So I'm going to go to the Scenarios tab. I'm going to begin to build these scenarios. So each of those operations that you saw on the left side of the map that were listed vertically are now listed horizontally across this worksheet. So in this demo, I'm going to create 3 scenarios. Now these are representing just a day's worth of activity. So you might, from that reporting information, derive maybe a 50th percentile day or maybe a really busy day like a 90th percentile day. But these are just 1 day's worth of activity. So you do have to kind of keep that in mind as you analyze these results. I'm going to name this first scenario current. So that'll be based on what the operators are currently flying based on the reporting data. And I'm going to assign on the eastern route, this one right here, the Cessna 172 flying at 9,000 feet, 1 flight. I'm going to assign 1 more flight to a Robinson R44 flying at 9,000 feet. And finally, to a fixed wing, the Cessna 172 flying at 9,000 feet coming in from the west. So now we might ask, well, what if operators all flew their full allotment, right? We saw that IOA bar in those bar charts. What might that look like? So for this scenario, I'm just going to assume that collectively they can all fly 3 times as many flights per year, which would equal to approximately 3 times as many per day. Oops, wrong spot. So I'm going to call this, let's see, doesn't like it when I do that. Call this one annual limit. I'm just going to assign 3 times as many flights to each of those same 3 operations. You can see the totals are being added up over here on the left. So the current has 3 flights per day. The annual limit might have 6 flights per day. So I'm going to make a third one. I'm going to call this agreement. And this one's going to explore conditions being proposed through an air tour agreement. So these agreements may include not only some annual cap, but they can have other provisions to protect park resources and visitor experience. These might be daily or seasonal restrictions, maybe some modification to the route or altitude. In this example, I'm just going to assume that the annual limit is some number between current and the full IOA allocation. But I'm also going to assign higher altitudes to the aircraft, as well as quiet technology where it's available. So in this case, where we started with the Cessna 172 at 9,000 feet, I'm going to now go to the Cessna 172 at 9,500 feet, so a little bit higher. I'm going to put 2 flights in there. The next one, we had the R44, the Robinson 44 at 9,000 feet. I'm going to go just right next door to the Eurocopter EC-130, which is a quiet technology helicopter, and it's flying at a higher elevation. Now this one's at 9,000 feet. And finally, for the west entry route, we had the Cessna 172 before, and I'm going to keep the Cessna 172, but now we're going to fly it at 11,000 feet instead of 9,500. So now you can see the daily totals for each. We have 3 flights, 9 flights, and then 6 flights. And with these recent upgrades, one of the benefits of this tool is we can do this all at once. So before, I would put in one scenario, get the results, copy the results, paste them in an Excel file, keep track of things that way. But now you can enter all these scenarios at once. In fact, I could build scenarios outside of this program in a spreadsheet where I might be manipulating reporting data or IOA data, and then just paste it into this worksheet right here. So it's been a great advancement in efficiency for using this tool and just having a lot more flexibility to look at other scenarios. So I'm going to save changes to the database. And just one other note, we can also export this data, this input data here, just for archiving and reporting purposes. So now that we have our scenarios built, I'm going to go back to the map, and this is where we generate those noise contours. So let's see, we're going to select current, we call it the current scenario, and I'm going to hide these flight routes just to make this a little less visually cluttered. I'm going to go back over here, and I'm going to generate a noise contour. Now it asks us what metric do we want to generate for the contour. In this case, I'm going to use the equivalent sound level. Click OK. So now that the tool is assembling the results for this scenario based on those 3 flight per day operations, and a window appears to log this processing. So this is all happening in real time. I didn't run this in advance. So this is what would have taken, weeks or months perhaps to get results completed and packaged up from our, say, a consultant. But here, now it actually logs the elapsed time. It was approximately 25 seconds. We have that result. So now that we have the contour, once we have this generated, this contour is treated like a layer on the map. We can turn it on and off over here, and we can adjust the transparency, get a better idea if there's any features below we want to look at. And we can also export this contour as a shapefile. So just simply right-clicking on that allows us to go ahead and export that layer. Now we have a shapefile that we can manipulate however we want. And this window here is just showing the percent of the park that's within each contour, each noise level contour. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about some of these details of acoustics like the equivalent sound level. This just happens to be a metric we look at frequently representing the average noise level generated from these 3 overflights in a day. So now I'm going to turn these off, and I'm going to go back and generate contours for the annual limit. Sorry about my spelling. And I can select both of them and do them both at once. Generate it. I'm going to, again, generate the equivalent sound level metric. Click OK. This will take a little bit longer, not much, but again, this is another improvement to this tool where I'm not doing one at a time. I can not only input all the scenarios at once, but then generate contours all at once. Where there are still possibly some upgrades to think about are when we generate these, you'll see in a minute here. So there's the agreement contour. So the annual limit will come up here in a second. you kind of want to see them all side by side, right? You can put them, overlay them on each other and get some sense of how they differ. It's still a visual evaluation, and I'll show you. It can actually be a quantitative evaluation too, but we're just kind of looking at them visually to see what's going on. You can play with the transparencies. Now we have all three. So if I have the annual limit one versus the current condition ones, it's a little hard to see. So what I actually did was go into my PowerPoint, and I can show you those three together, those three side by side. So these are those contours that just popped up in the tool. I generated them previously and pasted them in here so you can look at them side by side. Now you can see some subtle differences in them. If you look at, for example, the annual limit, there's more intense, light yellow and yellow colors, even a little bit of orange here representing higher noise levels. And when you compare that to the current, or especially the agreement conditions, now you can see there's definitely less activity in that current agreement conditions. In fact, even less than, lower sound levels in the agreement condition or scenario versus even the current, even though the agreement has 6 flights versus 3 in the current. So even though there's more flights, if you remember, we selected higher altitudes, and in one case, a quiet technology aircraft, and that's what we modeled in that scenario. So I'll go back to the tool now. And again, this is kind of this visual representation, but we can go and look more closely at these individual locations. So I go back here, and if I click on, I'm going to hide this stuff here, go back and click on chart. And now I need to click on the metric that we're interested in. Your chart properties, we're going to look at that equivalent sound level. And the units are dBA. And so now in addition to those contours, we have specific values at those green dot locations of interest. And we can compare all three scenarios side by side, at any given location. You can kind of hover over them, and it brings into view which scenario you're looking at, or just look at them all collectively. And I can also select other metrics that weren't available as contours. If you notice, there are just 2 available right now as the contours, an average sound level and a percent time audible. But here in this view, I can actually look at other metrics like a maximum sound level. So if I turn this one off, go to max sound level, that's a different metric. That's just simply the highest sound level experienced at that point. You might look at other metrics like time above 35 decibels. And we want to change that to a time unit. So that's giving you some sense of how many minutes during the day sound levels, this average sound level is above 35 for each of those scenarios. And we can view these both as a chart and in tabular format. It's all the same data, just represented differently. And we can also export these just by clicking on this export data or chart function. So again, with these recent upgrades, we can now import many scenarios at once, generate results, export tables and charts, as well as the shape files for those contours. So now I want to go into another function of this tool that's been very helpful. And that's called the zone analysis. So if I go back to the map, the zone analysis is just a capability in this tool which allows us to generate contour area results for smaller sub-areas in a park that might be under a different management zone, such as a backcountry or wilderness area. So to do that, though, I first have to import that layer. So I go to my OpenShape file, and I track down this layer, calling it the Mount Rainier Sound Zone. So as you can see, this is a very fictitious polygon. It just so happens that Mount Rainier's wilderness is actually almost an exact footprint of the park with just a few exceptions here and there. So just for the sake of the example, I wanted to have a zone that was very much different from the rest of the park. So now for the zone analysis, I'm going to go to the scenario builder and create a new operation, a fourth one, and I'm going to call this the sound zone. And to this, I'm just going to assign a single helicopter coming in on the western route. We'll use the, we'll use the EC-130 helicopter at 9,500 feet. I'm just going to put 1 flight on that operation. Let me save the changes. Let me go back to the map. And we go back to scenarios and sound zone, and we want to generate. We'll click equivalent sound level. So I'm still generating a noise contour map for the whole park based on this one flight. It's not, we haven't yet conducted the analysis specific to this zone, but I have imported that layer. And so we'll look at that zone specifically here in a minute. So that's the average sound level contour. I'm actually going to do another contour too. I'm going to do the time audible because that'll become useful here in a minute when we do another analysis. So I'm still in the sound zone. Remember, the sound zone is just a scenario representing that one helicopter on that one route. And I'm going to now assign a time audible metric. Select, we want the time in percent. Okay. And now it's generating that time audible contour. And you'll see it'll look quite a bit different between the average sound level. Average sound level is, again, a decibel value. What we're looking at here is percent time audible, or how long will you hear these aircraft during a 12-hour day. And in this case, you can see if I toggle back and forth between these two, there's your average sound level, here's your time audible. This is showing that over a much greater area of the park, you'll have some level of audibility. It might not be a lot, no more than maybe 5% of that 12-hour day, but you still will hear that one aircraft at some point in all those areas of the park. So now we have contours for these two metrics. And if you look at the, let's go back to the average sound level. If you look at the zone specifically, relatively speaking, the noise covers a lot of that zone compared to the park as a whole. I mean, you could just, by just eyeballing it, you might say the zone is maybe almost fully saturated, maybe 80 to 90% or more. But we can find those exact percentages through the zone analysis. And to do that, we go to that function, zone analysis, calculate. We're in the right contour. We have three other contours we could have selected, but we want to use the sound zone analysis. We're going to hit generate. And it said the results were ready. So you go to the sound zone analysis, pull down our sound zone. Let's see. Oops, let's go back. Calculate. Oh, I wanted to do LEQ. That's why it's looking funny. Let's go back. There we go. It's just a slightly more exciting table, if there is such a thing. Okay, here we go. So this is now, what this table is showing is showing you is not only the results for the park as a whole, but then for that small sound zone that I created. And this is similar to those little percent park windows that we saw earlier. But now we have percent area results for each contour for both the park and the zone. And so, for example, you can see in this row that I've highlighted that while about 36% of the park was affected by some overflight noise, about 90% of that zone was affected. And again, these zones could correspond to some management zones of the park, a wilderness area, or whatever area was of interest. And we can copy and paste these results for archiving and reporting as well. Okay, so I want to show one last function of this tool. And this is going to go back to PowerPoint briefly for this. Just to illustrate this wilderness air tier noise assessment strategy. See if I can make that bigger. There we go. Oops, that's not it. Let's go to that one. Try that. Okay. So this is just a special type of zone analysis, and it's based in a predetermined framework that was established for characterizing noise from air tours, specifically in wilderness. This framework was initially developed, or the efforts to develop it started years ago. It was a collaborative effort initiated by the Pacific West region in our office with the help of our office, and it was detailed. The final results of this framework, or the final framework itself, was detailed in a case study that was published in a special issue of the Journal of Forestry last year. And I'm showing you the title and authors there. So Megan's in our office. Amanda Raposa is with the Volpe Center, and hopefully she might even be on the call right now. Cindy Lee also with the Volpe Center. Vicki Ward is our overflights planner, and Judy Rocchio is our night skies and natural sounds, and I believe air quality rep in the Pacific West region. So with their help, we developed this framework and presented this case study. And this framework is essentially an index. It just takes into account all the complexities of noise, the spatial extent, the duration of noise, the sound level, and from that, you feed that information through this framework, and you end up with a tier. And a tier is a value on a 1 to 5 scale where there's actually a 0, but 1 or 0 is very quiet, whereas a 5 is much more noise, it's louder, and over a greater temporal and geographic extent. And obtaining this tier used to be a post-processing effort. You get the results from your air tour model in the tabular format. You would just visually compare those results through this framework and arrive at a tier. But this framework has now been integrated into the tool itself, and we can manipulate a lot of the thresholds associated with it. So I'm going to back out now to the tool. So we're going to determine the tier based on that sound zone scenario we just generated. If you click on the zone analysis, and remember, I generated, if you remember, I generated 2 metrics for this. It was an average sound level and a percent time audible. Both of those are functions of this worldliness tier framework. If we do determine tier, we see a window pops up, and the default values in this window are what was used in our paper, and they're things that were based on either scientific research or park management objectives. But in this case, the thresholds are sound that affects 20% or more of the zone of interest, which would be a wilderness area in this case. And within that, wherever it's audible, is it audible more than 25% of the time? And that's that dial. And is that noise ever greater than 35 decibels in level? And this framework also adjusts the tier based on the number of days on which tours occur. Because remember, we're only modeling 1 day. But say we wanted to model a park where air tours occurred May through September, so roughly 150 days. We can adjust that to modify the tier. And this last area threshold, what this means is that it determines how much of the area must be within a condition to satisfy that condition. So for example, when we specify 1%, what we're saying is that if 1% of the zone is at or above 35 decibels or more than 25% time audible, then that condition is true. But maybe 1% is too small. Maybe we want to say 5% or even 10%. You can adjust all these inputs to match your management objectives. So now using those contour results we've already generated and the decision points of that framework, the tool will determine that wilderness tier for us. So we go to wilderness tier, we go to the Mount Rainier sound zone that we generated, and here we have those results in a tabular format. You can see all 3 input values and are preserved here in the second column. The third column just tells whether or not that threshold was exceeded. And this fourth column is going to show you the actual maximum value. So in this case, for instance, here the maximum value of equivalent sound level was 30 decibels. It never exceeded the 35 threshold. So if you go back to that framework, it's going to take you down a different path and end up at a specific tier. So while the special zone analysis is based on this wilderness tier framework, it could be adapted in many ways for modifying the acoustic thresholds or other criteria that might be specific to a park management zone. We can change those dials, maybe to align with some kind of a standard that the park might have in place. All right, so I think, given that we're approaching the end of this hour, I will probably skip that. I can give it 30 seconds. What this is just showing is how we sometimes build scenarios based on reporting. And this is looking at data from Glen Canyon in 2013. And in this case, so what we have here are the date along the bottom, the full year, and the vertical axis are the number of flights per day. And so the red values are what was actually reported by the operators. And so then in the context of developing an air tour agreement for Glen Canyon and Rainbow Bridge, we wanted to know, well, what might conditions look like if they flew their full IOA, or interim operating authority allotment? And so what we did was just scale up each individual day proportionally until their full IOA was like saturated. And so this gave us 2 scenarios. And from this table, we could pluck maybe a 90th percentile day or a 50th percentile day and plug that into our model. When we presented this to the operators, they're like, well, we can't fly 225 flights a day. It's like physically impossible for us. So we got that feedback, and in no time we could say, okay, well, let's look at your reporting data, see what you actually have demonstrated you are capable of flying in a day, and let that be our maximum limit, and then redistribute flights throughout the year. And so that's what we did in the second, that's what the second chart represents. Where flights were capped at approximately 60 flights a day. And really this is just to illustrate that this was all a very fluid, dynamic process in working with the air tour operators and FAA on this agreement. So generating these modeling results in a matter of days and providing, a sense for our planners as to what might or might not be acceptable was really a great benefit and a testament to how well this tool worked for us in that case. And so with that, I just want to say, first of all, thanks to the Volpe Center staff who've helped us develop this tool, Amanda Raposa and Cindy Lee, and their software developer, Bjorn Cooper. They've been a great asset to this. They've been awesome in terms of working with us to modify it and upgrade it and take into account all of our kind of wish list items for this tool. So been a lot of help working with them, and I just want to close by saying that with this tool we can now quickly analyze all these scenarios of interest, generate information for reporting, and have a lot of flexibility in a fraction amount of the time. And like I said before, there's really no reason this tool wouldn't be limited to just aviation noise. I think as long as we have data layers for, it could be traffic or point sources like generators, it could be incorporated. A couple other quick program updates to you from our overflights program. We do plan to release the 2016 data soon. It's going to come out through a field memo from our Associate Director, Ray Savageau. But in the meantime, if you ever have any questions on air tour or any kind of air tour stuff or overflights in general, feel free to contact me or Vicki Ward or Adam Biko. And one other item is that I mentioned our Glen Canyon Rainbow Bridge Air Tour Voluntary Agreement, and it's right now in the Intermountain region for regional review. And as soon as we have the go-ahead to release it, that will be released for public review, possibly as soon as the end of November or early December. And so that'll kick off a 30-day public review of that document, after which we hope that would become our third air tour agreement after Big Cypress and Biscayne. So thanks a lot for your time and attending, and I'm happy to field any questions.
Great, thanks, Brent. That sounds like a really, really powerful tool, and thanks for walking us through it. We do have a couple of questions, and I do want to encourage anyone on the line, if you do have a question, go ahead and type it in the question pane there on GoToWebinar, and we'll try and get them to Brent. And if we run out of time, I'm sure that Brent would be happy to still answer your questions and email them, and we can put those on our website as well. So first off, we did have a comment from Katie, and I think it's probably true for most people that, her park has aircraft and road traffic concerns, and I imagine that's, like I said, likely true for most parks. And then Brent, another question is, do you know of any modeling data for military overflights?
Off the top of my head, I don't. I wish Vicki were on, because she would probably have that at her fingertips. We do. She's our military liaison, so she interacts a lot with the military, goes to Air Range Council meetings. I believe, and I'm only going to talk a little bit about this because it's only as much as I know, but we were engaged in some modeling for Olympic in the context of some Navy activity, but I don't know right now what the status is on that monitoring or if any subsequent modeling efforts were being undertaken.
Okay, so if they wanted to contact Vicki, maybe just send her an email then, and that's Vicki Ward.
Yep, send her, and what specific information they're looking for. We do a lot of external reviews for military airspace or bed down operations, and so for those operations we will, when we can, or when we've been provided with a notice of an intent to conduct an EIS, we'll comment on what we would like to see in an analysis, especially if it were to impact a park. And so those would include modeling. So if there's a particular airspace proposal or some activity of interest, just let us know and we can dig into what we have or find out more.
Okay, great. And then it looks like Brittany did enter Vicki's contact information there, so hopefully you can get it, and if not, just send us a line and we'll get it to you. Next question is for you, Brent. Are there currently any studies that marry these sound models with specific species impacts? So, for example, with decreased incidence of songbirds in a park location along the route or at a given, decibel level along the contour?
Yeah, so my answer was probably. There's Megan McKenna in our office has done a lot of work on kind of marrying up noise level studies in particular with wildlife impacts. And she co-authored a paper that looked at X number of decades of literature to see first of all, what literature did look at impacts on animals and wildlife, and how do they do their acoustic analysis? Did they talk about the metric or how, what their methods were? And from that has generated some, I guess, graphs, if you will, that might show what noise level correspond to impacts in wildlife. And so I would just encourage anyone to reach out to Megan McKenna specifically on that. I know there's been, studies of looking at phantom roads and an effect on wildlife and things like that. So, but I would direct any specific questions on wildlife to Megan. She'd be definitely your person to contact for that.
Okay, thanks, Brent. Great job just deflecting all these questions to other people
Thanks.
in
Yeah.
your division. That's pretty smooth.
You caught that, huh?
Yeah. So let's see. Again, if you have questions, go ahead and pop them in the question panel. Another question from Judy is NSNSD working on developing noise tiers for other noise sources like motorcycles, snowmobiles?
So we don't. No, we haven't built in or developed a framework yet specifically for those. However, like I said, this framework, the tool, because you can adjust, you can adjust what percent of the park, is a threshold. You can adjust what percent time audible or noise level is a threshold. It really would just be a matter of coming up with some rationale for those decision points. And as far as I know, we haven't applied this tier to those other sources other than aviation. A lot of the aviation threshold or decision points were based on dose response literature to those noise sources specifically, because there are differences in the whole, characteristics of these noise and how people respond to, say, helicopter noise, which has a different tonal components than, say, fixed wing aircraft noise. So it would have to be, it may have to be tailored specifically to those types of noise sources. But regardless of the tier, so the tier framework really is just, we get the results of the acoustics, the physical propagation of noise is in and of itself, a result. How you apply that, how you might want to characterize that in some kind of a tier or index framework, is entirely, up to us as planners and park management staff as to how they want to characterize that noise. I mean, whether this is a, whether, a park is at a tier 2 or a tier 3, you start with these physical conditions of noise, and then you feed it through whatever framework you want. In this case, it was a 1 to 5 scale. There's really no reason it couldn't be on a 1 to 100 scale too. A lot of it involves just how do you best aggregate these complex noise metrics into something meaningful, and that can be compared from like one scenario to another.
Okay, thank you, Brent. I'm going to go ahead and I was talking earlier about the next month's webinar. So while these questions keep coming in, I just want to remind everyone that next month we're going to have another webinar about the Year of the Bird. So it sounds pretty exciting. And in the meantime, I didn't get to show you guys a picture of Brent. So there's our awesome presenter. And so Brent, one more question for you is, which parks have the largest share of commercial air tours?
So yeah, if you think back to that top 9, so that's I'll pull up my 2016 list here and just read them off. But it was, New York has over 18,000. Hawaii volcanoes, 15,000. Then you kind of the second tier, kind of in the 4,000 to 5,000 to 7,000 group, Lake Mead, Haleakala, Mount Rushmore, Glen Canyon, Golden Gate, and the San Francisco parks, Rainbow Bridge. And then Badlands and Muir Woods have about 1,000. And then you have, then it's, 800 or so on down after that. So we really have these top 9 parks that exceed 1,000. And that's, for the most part, not entirely 100%, but for the most part, that's where our efforts are really focused right now, because not only do they have a lot of tours, but in a lot of cases they have very large IOA, that interim operating authority, which is that annual limit that operators could fly. And so it's not only a matter of managing the number of tours happening now, but kind of trying to manage through collaboration with FAA, how do you address the fact that, they could be flying 10,000 more flights at this park when it's already bad, where already the noise conditions are undesirable. So, that's where those, our energy is really focused now, bringing that IOA into something that is not impacting resources, nor has the potential to impact resources. And, these reports, we're trying to get them back up. We had to pull them off to make them 508 compliant, but we had the 2016 report. It is now 508 compliant, and I'm trying to get it posted as soon as I can. So that one will be up on our website very soon. And you'll be able to see all these charts and data, park by park, specifically.
Okay, great. Maybe we can put a link to that
Yeah.
on our site too. So a couple more here in these waning minutes here. Mike wants to know, where does the Grand Canyon fit in with the total numbers of tours? They report separately, but are they equivalent to your first or second tier?
Oh, they're way up there. They have 50,000 plus reported each year, versus under the NEPATMA legislation. And I know it's kind of silly that we're tracking them under different legislation, but that's just kind of how it worked. Outside of Grand Canyon, the highest tours were, 18,000 at New York. And now Grand Canyon, we have like 40 to 50,000. So a lot more air tours. There's also a lot of peripheral air tour activity there. There's maintenance and transportation flights. There are what they call repositioning flights. There are flights that are conducted through permission of the Hualapai that are actually not, they don't have to report. And that could be, they do report some of them, but they're not obligated to. And those that are reported might be on the scale of 40 to 50,000. So, there's conservatively probably 90,000 air tours over the Grand Canyon, or air tour related flights each year. So the scale, the scope is much bigger than any other parks. But then again, you have parks like Mount Rushmore where all the air tour activity is concentrated in one little spot. So it's those issues of scale and intensity that factor in as well. But Grand Canyon, yeah, it's totally under different legislation. We do get input. We do track the flights, or actually FAA does and provides us with the data. Each year we do look at the noise. We do model the noise levels to see if they're within the threshold established by Congress for achieving natural quiet. So there is a lot of activity associated with Grand Canyon as well.
Okay, thanks for that, Brent. And then finally, just another follow-up question. Do you have any idea of like how many park visitors are on the commercial aircraft during each of the tours?
No, yeah, and that's a great, that's something we've talked about a lot. You could make rough estimates based on make and model of aircraft multiplied by, maximum capacity for that aircraft, but it's not anything we track, nor at this point do we require that information.
Okay.
It might be possible to obtain some very high-level overview information from the air tour operators themselves, but we have no concrete information or data on air tour visitors. Okay,
well, that's pretty much all of our questions, and it's perfect timing because it's right at the top of the hour. So again, I want to encourage everyone to visit the websites on your screen right now for any more questions about the monthly webinar series and any answers from today's webinar. And thanks, Brent, for a great presentation, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. So thanks, everybody.